have a terrible memory. If I don't have notes, I have trouble remembering my mother's birthday, my office phone number, how many T's there are in commitment. The idea of giving a 5 to 7 minute speech with no notes is daunting. What if I stand up and can't remember what I'm going to say? What if I look out at my audience and draw a total blank? Thinking about it gives me sweaty palms. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests, today I want to tell you about a strategy for remembering the points you want to make in a story or a presentation. It's called the method of loci. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of the method of loci, how it works, and some of the feats of memorization that can be achieved using this method. The history of the method of loci dates back to the 6th century BC. At that time, poets, musicians, and storytellers were often employed to entertain at lavish banquets by politicians and businessmen. At one such event, Simonides, an orator, was hired by his patron Scopas to tell the story of a chariot race that Scopas won. Simonides told the story of the chariot race with drama and suspense, but he also talked a little bit about the gods. Scopas was very displeased to share his 15 minutes of fame with a couple of gods, so when it came time to pay Simonides, he only gave him half, saying, "You can collect the rest from the gods." Well, Simonides was a little miffed by this, and he left the banquet hall, but no sooner had he left than it collapsed, crushing everyone, Scopas and his guests included. So when the rescuers came to pull bodies from the rubble, they had a hard time identifying who was who. And they asked for Simonides' help because he had just been there. Simonides was able to remember all the guests by picturing in his mind's eye what the hall looked like, the placement of the columns, the art on the wall, and using these vivid images, he was able to remember who was seated at each location. So one moral of this story is that you should always pay a professional speaker the full asking price. And another moral is that you can use locations, or loci as they were called in ancient Greek, to help you remember things. Have you ever noticed that it's harder to remember a foreign name than a familiar one? Did you know that items on a grocery list are easier to recall if you know the recipes those ingredients go to make? Well, in general, memories are easier to recall if they're attached to ideas that you know well by heart, like locations. The structure of those locations acts as little hooks that you can hang the memories on, so that when you want to recall them, you just imagine walking through those locations again. But the link between locations and memories go deeper than that. They also go back to our evolutionary history. Early in our history, before humans were humans, it was an enormous advantage to remember where food was located. So we evolved to have a keen association between events and objects and locations in space. So when you use the method of loci to help you remember, you're tapping into an ancient process from our evolutionary past. You could say we evolved to use the method of loci. The method of loci allows ordinary people to perform extraordinary achievements in memory. For example, the method of loci was used to memorize 1,040 random digits in just half an hour. It was also used to memorize pi out to 65,000 decimal places. That's a lot of decimal places. Expert practitioners of memorization develop elaborate images of locations that they know well. The structure of these locations then help them recall arbitrary items from the list. They form elaborate images that tie those items to those locations. Dynamic and vivid images work best because they tend to be recalled more easily than static, boring images. So for example, if I have a list of chores I need to do when I get home, one of which is feed the dog, I'm more likely to remember that if I imagine my dog with a napkin tucked into her collar, sipping sherry and nibbling on cucumber sandwiches. This image will give it staying power that my dog's typical table manners would not. The method of loci is a powerful memorization technique. It dates back several millennia, and it's rooted in our evolutionary history. Those processes our brains evolved to perform. They support great achievements in memorization. But it's not just these great achievements, these 65,000 decimal places. You can also use the method of loci to help you do something as simple as remember a 5 to 7 minute speech. So for example, when I was talking to you, I used the method of loci to help me remember the points I wanted to make. When I told you the story about seminotis, I imagined this very room, columns around the edges, and all of you dressed in togas. I didn't imagine you being crushed, don't worry. For my next point, I imagined walking out into the foyer, except for instead of a table and a couple of chairs, I imagined an elaborate mobile hanging from the ceiling to remind me to tell you about the importance of the connection between ideas. For my final point, I imagine walking around to the Chamber of Commerce store, peeking in and seeing all of the fabulous, magical experts doing their work. Memorization can be a daunting and time-consuming chore that takes away energy that you could be using to develop your message. The method of loci helps put memorization in its place so you can focus on what you want to say.